Hello, my name is Dana Hartline. I am the founder and the creator of the Mormon Trauma Mama, which focuses on church trauma and healing. I have an incredibly talented team that works with me. We also have a Facebook group called LDS Church Trauma and Healing. Earlier this year, I did a presentation at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building on understanding and managing church trauma, which can be found on YouTube by typing in my name or even just church trauma. It can also be found on the Mormon Trauma Mama. My team and I are organizing a summit this fall that we are bringing together some of the top minds in this movement to try to collaborate and support each other as we draw awareness to the very harmful effects of church trauma in the LDS Church. And in preparation for that, I developed this church trauma tree, which I would like to talk to you about today. So in our summit, we are going to be hitting these roots. And so you can expect that there's more coming as we develop and discuss in magnitude these roots. So today what I would like to do is talk about the causal effects, the consequences of what is in the roots. But here we have the causal effects of trauma. We have organizational behavior, patriarchal structure, unrighteous dominion, unsafe practices, cultural behavior, church doctrine, unsustainable history, and discrimination. So these are the causal effects of trauma. And as we have these problems, we're going to have an influx of consequences. And so this is what I would like to talk to you about in this video here. So the first one we have is cognitive dissonance, such as fear and confusion. Now when it comes to church, too often religious organizations and leaders are deemed incapable of inflicting any kind of suffering or engaging in any wrongdoing or abuse. So when abuse does occur, there's severe cognitive dissonance that will often arise within the victims as they struggle with the horror of the abuse and the perception of the clergy's divine authority. Attempts to resolve this dissonance will often involve the victims blaming themselves, which will often be reinforced by the perpetuator's affirmative statements and other people who believe that they can do no wrong as well. Thus, too often, in an attempt to meet the need for community or an attachment to God, the victims will internalize the abuse. They will adopt the belief that they are sinful as a way to keep their view that the perpetrator is good. However, by adopting this belief, as a way to resolve their cognitive dissonance, they pay a very high price of self-loathing and self-criticism for circumstances that are beyond their control. So another consequence that we will see is church exodus. This is due to the lack of safety they find at church. Rather than it being a hospital, a place that they go to find healing, to feel well, it's a place of trauma, a place that causes an emotional uproar just to enter. And so for the sake of their mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, they walk away. The next one we have up there is disassociation. Now we may think that this is the same as church exodus, and it can be. But often it is not. Because of the teachings of the church, there is no viable reason to leave that is given, that is offered to its members. And so because of this, members will stay there, but they disassociate. They disassociate with not only others, but with themselves. They tell themselves, this isn't real, I'm not really here, that person isn't really there. And we see this all the time. We see people who are not fully functioning in the church, and we think, what's wrong with you? What's your problem? Well, maybe we need to get down to the root of the problem to really understand this disassociation issue. Because it says to stay as far away as they can from their abusers and all of their associates and anything else that triggers trauma, which is often anything church-related, particularly the church building, but they still have to be there. So a lot of problems with that one. The next one is abuser loyalty. And at this point, I want to explain that everybody's trauma tree is going to look different because everyone internalizes it differently. So with the abuser loyalty voice, it says to just do better, to be better. It's the I'm not good enough, so I'll just fake it until I make it. Or it's all my fault voice. And so the traumatized, they just sidle up with their abusers. They just want to fit in, to look like, act like, serve like, be like their abusers, to pretend that all is well in Zion. So they serve a little harder, smile a little bigger, and butter up just a little bit more. The next we have a loss of identity. Trauma messes with concept of self. After one is traumatized, one does not know who they are anymore. They're not like combat soldiers where they go and train for battle. They are completely sideswiped. And they are just trying to get back to normal, but soon they realize that normal is out the door. Because the church is often all they have ever known. There is no solution outside of that for them, and yet it isn't working anymore. And in addition to having that loss of identity within themselves, members often are attaching labels, and they're treating them like apostates or heretics or even subhumans. It's not just the victims who will disassociate, but also active members will begin to disassociate with the trauma victims. Too often they are treated as if they are the cause of the trauma, when they are really the mere sufferer. So another consequence is mental disorders. Too often what we are doing is we are treating the symptoms of trauma. We are treating depression, we're treating anxiety, we're treating OCD. But until we get down to the roots, the causal factors of trauma, we are only applying mere band-aids. We need to get out of those branches. Research shows that mental illnesses are misdiagnosed. That what we are truly dealing with mental illnesses is trauma. And the church needs to look at this influx that we are seeing with mental illnesses. Utah, which is, 70% LDS, is ranked #1 in the nation with mental illnesses. Let's come down and start really looking at this if we want to have a healthier people. So the next one we have is family dysfunction. We need to be very clear here. When we are talking about trauma, we are talking about families. No man is an island. When you hit a mother, you have just hit a family. And this is often generational. The truth is that there is trauma in our church history, nearly right from the onset, particularly with women and minorities. And studies show that children vicariously connect with the pain and suffering of their parents. And this is more common than perhaps we realize, how it's just carried down from generation to generation. When you're seeing in your family line, you're seeing depression and you're seeing grief and you're seeing anxiety, we need to maybe look at what is going on here, because it is carried down. And the genographs will show you this, that family members are connecting vicariously, and so many of them have STS, which is secondary traumatic stress. And this is something else that should be concerning to you. In environments where mothers are being mistreated, research shows that the children are being treated likewise. So the last one I have on here is shame. We very much live in a tame and shame culture. I should say shame first. Shame and tame culture in the LDS church. We kind of like the guilt. We kind of like perfectionism because it keeps us in line. It keeps us guilty. Because offense is all offense. Offense is all we're taught. So everything is offense. And so all the responsibility is thrown back onto the traumatized. In another setting, I will talk about the difference between trauma and offense, because they are distinctly different. But when you call it offense and it is trauma, which people do not choose to be traumatized, you are spiritually abusing that person, and that needs to stop. Because what happens too often is that we are shaming rather than embracing those who have been hurt. Rather than hearing and loving and accepting and validating these people and believing them, we are shaming them. And so there we have suicide. I would like to talk about this for just a moment. Utah is ranked the 8th happiest state in the nation. There is a lot of happy living in Utah. And whenever you have a great deal of happiness, you're going to have a counter response. Utah is also ranked 5th in the nation with suicide. Now, I've heard it said in Utah, well, it's a high altitude. Now, I want to talk about that. So in my graduate studies, as I was studying suicide, only in Utah did I see that justification. But the truth is that all of the high mountainous states, the high altitude, you have the highest happiness in living. But there's also, all of the highest mountainous states are also in the highest in suicide, because you have a counter response. And in the LDS culture, when you find you don't fit the mold, when you don't make the cut, when that bar is higher than you're able to reach, and when people are telling you you're not good enough and you just don't make the cut, you're going to have that counter response. In a 2001 study, it showed that the #1 cause of suicide among LDS boys was masturbation shaming. And for LDS girls, it was losing their virginity or having a baby out of wedlock. If we truly care about the well-being of our members in this church, we need to get down to the roots and examine what is truly happening. And that is what the summit that is coming up is all about. And you'll be hearing more about that shortly. Thank you.